Greetings, friends, and welcome to the 32nd edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am the aforementioned Paul, and here's Ben.
Hey! As some of you may not know, sea monsters are my bag. When I was a youngin', I was always after my dad to take me to Loch Ness in Scotland, as if Nessie would just pop up and shake hands with me as soon as I got there. We haven't made it to Loch Ness yet, but we've been to Lake Champlain, the home of Champ, between Vermont and New York, several times. Champ didn't come and shake my hands. I was crushed, but I got over it.
I remember having dinner out in that dock, that restaurant in Burlington, and we were talking about Champ, and you and Jonathan kind of looked around because the water was all around us. But I haven't seen him either. I spent a lot of time up there, but I've heard all kinds of stories, and so have you, and someday we'll nail the guy. Anyway, BJ from Pennsylvania won last week's paranormal contest. The question was, if you were out alone on a dark road in Staffordshire, England, what paranormal animal might you meet? We wanted the actual local name, not the general name. Many listeners tried, but all but two failed. The general name was the mysterious black dog, a common apparition in many areas, especially rural Britain. But the black dog around Staffordshire is known as Padfoot, and that's the answer we were looking for. We had a long give and take by email on this question with Rebecca in Illinois, but she felt that she was so long coming to the answer that she shouldn't be declared the winner.
So, BJ wins a copy of my dad's 2006 book, Turning Home, Gods, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. But what do you say, Dad? Rebecca was such a good sport. Let's send her a book anyway.
Okay. Well, why not, Ben? I think you're right. Rebecca mentioned that the only one of my books that she doesn't have is Faces at the Window, so let's send her that.
Sure, why not?
Okay, and thanks for all your interest, Rebecca. We really appreciate it.
Our question for today is, what disease was often mistaken for lycanthropy? Oh, wait, might be. Let me start over again. What disease was often mistaken for lycanthropy? If you can figure this one out, drop us a quick message or call us at 888-235-7374. If nobody gets it before the end of the show, drop a line to me at benbehindtheparanormal.com. Be the first to get it right and win a copy of Kronos, the new novel by the New England Sea Serpent. New novel about the New England
Sea Serpent didn't write the novel. I don't think.
Well, about the New England Sea Serpent.
Oh, okay.
I was working at 7-3. Give me a break.
I'm sorry.
For tonight's guest.
Okay, well, even though he's primarily a novelist, Jeremy Robinson is an authority on the great New England sea serpent, a creature witnessed by more people than many cryptids that are far better known. Now, we think of sea serpents, we think of, Loch Ness and maybe the Ogopogo up there in Lake Winnipeg and, of course, Champ in Vermont. And we often don't think of the many, many others. And we have a kind of an experience with one we can talk about a little bit later, not personally, but at a lake we know very well. Anyway, Jeremy Robinson was born in the sometimes mysterious seacoast town of Beverly, Massachusetts, which is on the coast north of Boston, not too far from Salem. His father encouraged a love for science fiction, as did mine. Jeremy writes, "When I wasn't exploring the islands and coastal caves of New England, I was creating giant murals on my bedroom walls, futuristic cities, dragons, spaceships, aliens, and the four walls of my room were never barren." And he also mentioned to me that he always loved comic books, and Superman and Star Trek and all this stuff filled his days.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Jeremy became a writer and illustrator of comic books and comic strips, most notably his own creation, Ralph, which I believe I've seen in a few newspapers. But he soon switched to writing screenplays and producing short films. He moved to Los Angeles. In his 2 years there, in the Hollywood vicinity, Jeremy wrote the Screenplay Workbook, which was published in 2003. With his Hollywood contacts made and desiring fresh air and quiet for writing, Jeremy and his family returned to New England, where they currently live in New Hampshire. Or as you used to say when you were a little, New Hamster. I thought that was cute. In the pastoral calm of the Granite State, Jeremy has managed to write 2 more screenplays, 5 novels, 10 short stories, and several articles. And he's working on 2 more novels. Hopefully he'll tell us about them a little bit later on. His most recent novel, Kronos, has as its centerpiece the great New England sea serpent. Now, as I say, don't let the fact that he's a novelist fool you. Jeremy is an authority on this phenomenon, which occurred pretty much between 1641 and 1997. And there was a lot more, but we'll let Jeremy tell us about that himself.
And there's more information, and some pictures even, on the Talking Points page of our show at www.behindtheparanormal.com. Jeremy Robinson, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
I don't think he's with us yet.
Oh, well.
Okay. Is he? No.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Jeremy, there you are. Okay. Usually yeah, you're out there somewhere.
See, I was right.
Oh, you were right. I bow to your superior knowledge of reality, Ben. Yeah, usually we have the producer informs us over our little screen here that you're there. Well, we're glad to have you with us, and welcome again Behind the Paranormal.
Great to be here. I'm happy to be the first sea serpent you've had on the show.
You are the first sea serpent we've had on the show. Yeah, Loch Ness, he's just, I don't know, too high and mighty. Anyway, Jeremy, can you give us an overview of the great New England sea serpent phenomenon? Like, when did people see it, et cetera?
The first sighting was actually in 1638, not 1641. That was the second sighting. The first sighting was 1638 in Cape Ann, which is a collection of Gloucester, Rockport, Essex, and Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts. And that was by two Englishmen and two Native Americans, and being good colonials, the Englishmen wanted to shoot it. And the Native Americans warned them that if they didn't kill it on their first shot, then they would all be in danger of their lives. And what's really interesting about this story is that it kind of shows that the Native Americans had a pre-existing knowledge of this creature. This wasn't the first time they'd seen it. They, recognized it for what it was and said, if you shoot that, we're all in big trouble. And they didn't shoot it. So they paid attention. That was the first major sighting, and as you mentioned, the last sighting reported that I know of right now is in 1997. So it's been seen reported since 1638 until 1997 by more than 200 reports. Sometimes 200 people at a time saw it. So there's actually more than 200 total sightings if you include all of the people at each individual sighting. The most widely known sighting was something that happened in 1817 in Gloucester Harbor. There were 22 sightings between 1638 and 1817, but in 1817 there were 18 reported sightings all in that 1 year, mostly in the month of August.
Now, it's funny. Let me just interrupt you for a minute here, Jeremy. My apologies, but I do happen to have in front of me a sworn affidavit by a fellow named Matthew Gaffney from 1817. And if I may read it, it may amplify what you're saying, certainly. And I quote, that on the 14th day of August, A.D. 1817, between the hours of 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I saw a strange marine animal resembling a serpent in the harbor in said Gloucester. I was in a boat and was within 30 feet of him. His head appeared full as large as a 4-gallon keg, his body as large as a barrel, and his length that I saw I should judge 40 feet at least. The top of his head was of a dark color, and the under part of his head appeared nearly white, as did also several feet of his belly that I saw. I fired at him, as you say, of course, when he was the nearest to me. Unquote. Does that match with most of the descriptions?
That's actually a very good description. In those times, they often just compare things to barrels and kegs and things like that. So it's always funny to read those descriptions. But the dark coloration on top, the light coloration beneath, it's usually described as a horse-shaped head, and between 50 and 200 feet in length.
Mm-hmm. And we know about descriptions, and we live in Rhode Island, which is the standard of size for all things. Whenever an ice sheet breaks off, it's always the size of Rhode Island, or something happens. Right. Oh, it could fill the state of Rhode Island. So we have an inferiority complex. I can imagine how the sea serpent would have felt being compared with barrels. So please go on. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. You were talking about other sightings.
Physical description. Most people said that it had fins and that it moved with vertical undulation. So it moves like a snake, but vertically up and down rather than side to side.
Okay. Now, I seem to recall there was, and I wish I had thought of this before this moment, but I'm kind of into H.P. Lovecraft, who was a cousin of mine, actually. I obviously didn't know him. He was way before my time, but he was related to my father's family. And he was what was called an amateur journalist. One of the things that sort of got him out of his shell in Providence. H.P. Lovecraft, if anybody doesn't know who he is, was probably the 20th century's answer to Edgar Allan Poe, a great author of horror stories and early science fiction stories, and certainly has a place in American literature. And he was from here in Rhode Island, very, very much attached to his native city of Providence. But he did come out of his shell for a while to join the amateur journalist movement, which was a bunch of people who, back before computers, this is in the 1910s and 1920s, would put together their own newspapers and send them to each other as a hobby. And they had a convention in Boston. I believe it was the 1918 convention, if I'm not mistaken. And they all went out on a boat. Going to have a convention in Boston, you always had to take a tour of Boston Harbor, right? This particular boat went out up as far as Gloucester and back, and they reported there were some strange doings in the water, and someone brought up that the great New England sea serpent had dwelt in this area. And I don't think it was ever a recorded sighting, but it might add to your quiver there one possible sighting reported by a bunch of people who were amateur journalists.
Right, that's really interesting. What year was it again?
I believe I'll have to look it up. I'll let you know maybe by email. I believe it was 1918 or 1920.
Okay. That's really cool.
But in any case, what sort of credibility did these sightings have in those days? Were people less skeptical than they are today about these things?
I believe they were less skeptical in general. I think because a lot of people hadn't fully experienced the ocean, but the reason I think why people were believing them more readily than they do today is that there was the people who were seeing them were fishermen, were sailors, were U.S. Navy sailors, were Coast Guard, people who spent their entire lives on the ocean. And if anyone was going to say this is something that no one has ever seen before, it was these guys who were seeing it, who spent their entire lives on the ocean. And now, people are more skeptical in general, I think, because we've had a lot of hoaxes, in all kinds of different areas with UFOs and with Loch Ness, and so we're kind of trained to be more skeptical. But back then, these were people just trying to be honest. There was no money to be made in it, and they, like today, they risked the ridicule for it. But I think given the occupation of the people who were making these accounts is, they weren't people who would mistake a line of dolphins for a sea serpent.
Yeah. Ben had a question.
Oh, yeah. Do you believe that that this creature really existed?
I believe that people are seeing something. Exactly what it is, of course, no one really knows. But yeah, I believe that there is something out there, probably something that has not been identified yet. And I know, a lot of people say, well, that's really weird that, we haven't found something that big yet. But just in 2007, we got our first glimpse of a colossal squid, and that's a 40-foot creature. And just in 2007, we got a first glimpse of it. So it's very possible that something this large could be in the ocean, and we have not seen it for long enough to snap a picture of it.
Well, I remember that the giant squid, of course, was doubted by science, or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
For,
it was a myth.
For decades or centuries. And despite the fact that you had, what was that up in the St. John's, Newfoundland?
Attack the boat or something.
Yeah, they'd be sitting in the harbor. Guys would be fishing, and then this thing up and grab them out of the boat. And they still didn't believe it. Yeah, you remember that? It wasn't that long ago, 1914 or so, relatively speaking, not that long. But in any case, one never knows. I remember I had the honor of knowing Ivan T. Sanderson, who was a somewhat eccentric fellow, but he was probably the first of the great cryptozoologists, way back, and he was a marine biologist by training. And he once wrote to me the story of something that had just happened. I wish I remembered the names of the other scientists involved. I'd look it up if I'd known. See, I'm excited by this subject, so stuff pops into my mind. And he said that they were not fishing, but they were in a research vessel off the Marianas Trench. And just on a hunch, they baited a chrome steel hook, which was huge, lowered it to a depth of, it must have been at least a mile. And in the middle of the night, the whole ship shook.
Wow.
And they hauled the thing up after great trouble. The hook was straightened out.
Wow.
So I mean, there is got to be something down there. Whether it staked its claim off New England is another issue. Now, Jeremy, I'm sorry.
I was just agreeing.
Pretty amazing. Yeah. Given more than 3 centuries of these sightings off New England here, do you think there may be more than one creature, if there is such a creature, or more than one generation of them? I mean,
that's the most likely scenario. And another interesting point about the 1817 sightings is that there was one report of 2 serpents being seen together in the harbor.
Okay.
So, and that's really interesting because there's only 12 sightings worldwide, and all have recorded serpent sightings of there being more than one serpent. So this is one of very few reports of there being more than one serpent. But that led to a few months after the August sightings in October, there was a little boy who started screaming, and when his father ran out, the boy had killed what they thought was a spawn of the 2 serpents in the harbor. And they brought it to the Linnaean Society at the time, who had launched an investigation into this. And they actually bought it, that this was a spawn of 2 sea serpents, and they dubbed it Scoliophis atlanticus. And that's the Atlantic hump snake.
Wow.
And later on, it was shown to be a deformed black snake. So it was not the spawn of a sea serpent. It was a deformed black snake, and the society was so embarrassed that they disbanded. And that is, I think, one of the things that has prevented serious investigation of the New England sea serpent, is because, the Linnaean Society at the time got really burned by this and ended up falling apart.
I wondered what happened to them, because wasn't Henry David Thoreau involved with them at one point or another after he got out of Harvard? Anyway, but that's amazing. I hadn't heard of that. When was that again?
That was in 1817. That was October 1817 when they found the deformed snake.
Well, I remember that Roy Mackle, and I was in touch with him briefly as well, was the first fellow to go to Loch Ness, marine biologist, and to use sonar. I believe he was the first to use sonar. And he detected what could have been, but Loch Ness, it's really hard to tell anything.
Yeah.
More than one creature, and he was convinced there had to be. He always referred to them as the Loch Ness animals. Never Nessie or the monster, that's whatever. And he thought there had to be over periods of centuries. You don't have one creature; there has to be a population.
And there are lots of caves there that have been unexplored. So
very true, yeah. So unless you drain the thing, you're not going to find out for sure, I guess. Now, one of the things that happened at Loch Ness was on several occasions the creature was reported on land. Remember, the guy named Grant was driving his car. The thing crossed right in front of him. Was that ever the case with the New England creature that you know of?
I don't think people have seen it crawling on the land, but there was a few where they found it coiled on a rock.
Really?
So it coiled up like a snake, and then when they came, it dove into the water. But there was one report of a woman who was looking out over Gloucester Harbor during the 1817 sightings, and she saw what she thought was a fallen tree on the shore, on the opposite shore. And when she came back a few minutes later, she saw it move a little bit, so she started looking at it, and she left to go do some chores and came back, and it was gone. So that was a part of the collection of the 1817 sightings, is that she saw it on the shore. So yeah, there have been sightings where it has been resting on the shore, but not, no one has seen it like moving across the shore.
Okay. Now again, how big would you say what people were seeing is? I know that reports will often vary when you have these. But, when you look at witnesses, witnesses get a bum rap sometimes. Very often they are quite accurate in reporting sizes. I find that. See, this is from my Coast Guard experience too. How big would you say this thing, should it exist, be, or was it?
Well, like you said, it does vary a lot, and that could be because there are generations of the creature, so people are seeing younger ones and older ones. But the average size, I think, is about 100 feet.
100 feet?
Yeah, 100 feet. And there are reports up to 200 feet. So it's possibly the largest creature in our ocean. Maybe not, but the largest report is 200 feet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the skeptics will say, well, how do you miss something that big? But I mean, the ocean is a big place. Yeah.
Right.
And so it's perfectly,
very big.
So who knows? Yeah. Are you aware of any reports of what we might call collateral phenomena, and this has to do with our own theories about the paranormal in general. I mean, reports of ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, etc., at the same time or in the same areas this creature was sighted. I know it's a tough question, but a flap.
Well, it's an easy question because, no, I haven't heard. But I would say if it were going to happen, New England would be the place for it, given the amount of serpent sightings, ghost hauntings, and UFO sightings we have up here. This would be the place it was going to happen, I think.
Yeah, I know. As New England, 10th generation and 11th generation New Englanders, I certainly agree with you.
Yeah.
I think Ben had another question.
Have you ever studied any other, cryptids in New England or anywhere else?
In addition to this?
Yeah.
I tried doing some research on New England Bigfoot sightings, but none of them really were interesting enough for me to kind of sink my teeth into and get any further. But right now I'm researching the Vietnamese version of Bigfoot, which is called Ngoi Rung. And it's basically the same thing as Bigfoot, maybe a little smaller, maybe a little more ape-like. But they're basically, Ngoi Rung means the forest people. So it's this tribe they think lives out in the forest. And my theory on them is that they are kind of a lost tribe of Neanderthals, because when Homo sapiens came out of Africa and co-populated the region with Neanderthals, for a while things kind of went sour, and Neanderthals were pushed further and further into Asia, and possibly there are remnants of them living in the Annamite range in Vietnam and Laos, which has been called a modern Noah's Ark because it's so rough terrain and it's full of landmines from the Vietnam War that people don't go there very often. So there's a lot of large mammals that have never been discovered that we're slowly starting to find in this area. So it's possible that these forest people are living in the Annamite range and are just waiting to be discovered.
But none of them ever became sea monsters, as far as you know.
No sea monsters in
I'm joking, of course.
Not gonna lie,
let me make a suggestion to anybody who is interested in looking for Bigfoot, and we haven't had a Bigfoot show yet as such. We've done Mothman twice, but we're going to do a Bigfoot show. That's talk to hunters, okay, and talk to National Guard members, because I had friends in the National Guard. I did a lot of time in the military myself, and there were friends in the National Guard who were here in Rhode Island swore they have been close enough to Bigfoot to play baseball with him. And that's down in the Great Swamp area of Rhode Island. Now, Rhode Island is very small. New England isn't all that big. And as you know, in New Hampshire, which is growing in population, there are tremendous wilderness areas. Even in Rhode Island, as small as it is, this area of the Great Swamp supposedly has Bigfoot living there and witnessed by, relatively credible people. In my opinion. So, and hunters, too. I know that Ben was not even born, and his older brother and I were over in the what's known as the Bridgewater Triangle area, the Hockomock management area in Massachusetts, which is over 220 square miles. Supposedly has Bigfoot and all kinds of things. No sea monsters that I know of, but all sorts of amazing phenomena. And you talk to hunters, and they'll give you the straight dope on this stuff. So anyway, let me ask you this, Jeremy. As a novelist, have you incorporated real sightings and events from what we've talked about into the Kronos story?
I incorporated the historical record. So as the characters in the book are trying to figure out what this thing is, they're looking up information in other books, and they're discovering these old articles. And so I quote the articles and give the headlines from the actual things. I didn't fictionalize any of the old stories.
Excellent. Okay.
So they're in there. They're presented as this is something that actually happened, but I didn't turn it into a story.
Okay. All right. Well, if you'll be kind enough to hold on, we're going to take our break, and we're going to be back with Jeremy Robinson, author of Kronos and authority on the Great New England Sea Serpent. And we're going to talk about his books, and I have a few other questions, too. And if anybody's interested, please call us in. I know everybody's interested, but if everybody's interested in sharing their stories about any sort of sightings of sea monsters or anything you want to call it, give us a call. And there we go. So we're going to take our break now, and we'll be back shortly with Jeremy Robinson, author and monster expert par excellence.
Press is proud to sponsor tonight's segment of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Benjamin Eno. New River Press offers the best in unusual New Age books. Stand by the side of tonight's host, Paul Eno, as he battles poltergeists and helps suffering souls and families in the critically acclaimed books Faces at the Window and Footsteps in the Attic. Plunge deeper into the paranormal with Paul and learn about his influence on human history, its action in our daily lives, and its ultimate meaning for us in the best-selling Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. Available now from New River Press, publishers of unusual books. Visit newriverpress.com, amazon.com, or your favorite bookstore. And set for release late this year in one of the most unusual books on the subject ever written, Paul gives us Dancing Past the Graveyard, What Ghosts Have to Say About God.
There is something inside us that aches to change the world, that wants to make a difference. But sometimes we get stopped because we think, well, how can I make a difference? What can one person do? Well, imagine if everyone who felt that way got together. How powerful would that be? Well, that's exactly what Humanity Unites Brilliance does. It brings together people who feel the same way about global transformation and provides a central uniting place for everyone to get together to move towards creation of a world of self-sustainability and self-empowerment. Go to passionforhumanity.com and see what I'm talking about. Here's a chance to unite some of the most effective nonprofit and for-benefit organizations and at the same time give you access to resources from some of the world's most inspirational leaders. You'll meet people with similar visions as you. You'll have a support network designed to connect you and your passions with others. You'll transform while you help transform the world. PassionForHumanity.com. Explore and change the world.
I'm Alec Baldwin. Like any parent, I'm concerned about children's health. Many kids don't eat as they should and are at risk for long-term health problems like diabetes and heart disease. But here's good news. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and other low-fat vegetarian foods can protect our kids and keep the rest of the family healthy too. For a free booklet, call the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine at 1-877-685-KIDS or visit www.kidsgethealthy.org.
Hi folks, this is Paul Eno, co-host of Behind the Paranormal here on Achieve Radio. We're very pleased to have as our sponsor New River Press and Barking Cat Books, publishers of some of the most unusual New Age titles on the market today. Along with 4 books by moi, New River Press offers the blockbuster on animal communication, Hear All Creatures, The Journey of an Animal Communicator by Karen Anderson, Shadows on My Shift, real-life stories of a psychic EMT by psychic medium Sherry Lee Devereaux, Achieve Radio talk show host of Opening Your Intuitive Eyes, and in a true story that will break your heart with its beauty, especially if you've ever lost a child, there's 41 Signs of Hope by Dave Kane, about the ongoing love and communication between a father and a mother and their son, youngest victim of the 2003 nightclub fire in Rhode Island. Finally, from Barking Cat Books, don't miss the action-adventure that spans 1,000 years, Heaven's Wave, a novel of the doomsday prophecy of 2012 by Dierlein. Visit newriverpress.com, barkingcatbooks.com, amazon.com, or your favorite bookstore.
Listening to AchieveRadio.com, the positive side of broadcasting.
And we're back with author Jeremy Robinson here on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on Achieve Radio. To participate in any of our discussions today, or to share your own water monster stories, or sea monster as they're normally called, drop us a quick message or call us at 888-235-7374, toll free in North America, or 602-412-4949 from anywhere else. First, though, let me repeat our paranormal question for today. What disease was often mistaken for lycanthropy? Be the first to get it right and win a copy of Kronos, the new novel about New England sea serpents by tonight's guest. Jeremy, what is Kronos about?
You know what? I can barely hear you guys.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you can hear me, but it's During the break, I got the line disconnected, and now I can barely hear you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me any better?
It's just the volume is fine. It's the sound is really grainy. You're chopping in and out.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'll try to speak very clearly. Ben wanted to know what Kronos is about.
What Kronos is about. Kronos starts with a father who is an oceanographer, an ex-Navy SEAL, and widower, trying to patch things up with his daughter. So he takes her out to go scuba diving in the Gulf of Maine with a pod of humpback whales. And something rises out of the deep and swallows her whole, which is not a very nice thing. So this turns into kind of a Moby Dick quest for revenge for the father as he pursues the creature, which is based on the New England sea serpent. And along the way, as he is trying to exact his revenge by killing the creature, he discovers something that kind of turns the whole story on its head. And I really wanted to take the sea serpent story and the deep sea kind of horror story, man versus beast, in a new direction. And so I think I have accomplished that in Kronos. I can't give away what that secret is. That would be like seeing The Sixth Sense and knowing that Bruce Willis was a ghost.
Sure.
So I think that the twist will be very interesting to see what people think about it.
Excellent. Where can people get it?
Say that again?
I say, where can people get the book?
People can get the book on Amazon.com or at Barnes & Noble. It should be on shelves on the 20th, so in, 3 days from now, or 2 days?
Yeah.
And it's available for pre-order right now at all these places. So, I mean, if you're nice to Barnes & Noble, maybe they'll take one out of the back room and give it to you now.
Well, we have a few connections.
I wouldn't mind personally, but it should be at Barnes & Noble, and any other bookstore that doesn't have it will be able to order it for you or on Amazon.com. And you can find out more about the book at my website, JeremyRobinsonOnline.com.
Excellent. Okay. Now, can you tell us about your other novels?
Yeah, the last one that came out was titled Antarctos Rising, and that involves a theory called crustal displacement, where the entire Earth's crust kind of shifts over the molten core of the Earth all at once. And this happens at the beginning of the story, moving North Dakota to the North Pole and bringing Antarctica up to the equator. And what happens is that, the results are devastating. 2.6 billion people die at the beginning of the book. It's not a very happy beginning. And then the rest of the world is now displaced from where they live. Most of America is frozen over, and there's a race to see who can claim the now thawed continent of Antarctica first. But when the nations all get there to start this race to claim the continent, they find that there are creatures already living there and claiming it as their own. And those creatures, I suppose, it says on the back of the book what they are, so I can tell you. It's the Nephilim, which are recorded in Genesis in the Bible.
Yeah, we've heard of them.
Yes, I'm sure that they are talked about in a lot of UFO circles.
Yeah. Well, that's actually but keep going. I mean, you have other novels too, right?
Yes, I have. Before that was Raising the Past, and that was a very science fiction Arctic thriller. And before that was a time travel thriller titled The Didymus Contingency, where the main characters go back in time to try and disprove the story of Jesus.
Those are fascinating plots. I wish you could hear me. Anyway, that sounds absolutely wonderful. What are you working on now? What new books do you have cooking?
My next book, called Pulse, is coming out on May 26th. This is my first hardcover, so I'm really excited about it. Pulse involves a genetics company who is trying to create a formula for regeneration in human beings. Right now, we can regenerate fingertips, things like that, but they want to be able to regenerate limbs like salamanders can, things like that. So they dig back into history and they find a creature that has this ability to regenerate very quickly and discover its DNA. And the heroes in the book are trying to stop them from perfecting this formula because they will be able to sell it on the black market to terrorist organizations, and then we will have armies who can't die and suicide bombers who can live to strike again and things like that. There is a creature in this book. I don't know if I should say what the creature is because it's a really cool surprise when it comes out in the story.
You better not say it.
Say that again?
You better not say it then.
Okay. But that one comes out in May, and the next one, the one I'm writing now, is the one I mentioned before. It's called Instinct, and it's based on the Ngoy Rung in Vietnam. And it's the same characters. This is a series that's coming out, Pulse, Instinct, and then the untitled third book.
That's excellent. I wish... I guess I know what we're going to be reading for the next 6 months or so.
Most definitely.
That sounds great. Jeremy, we're almost out of time here, but I wanted to thank you. As I say, I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much for a fascinating conversation, and we'd like to, have you back at some point too, because we really enjoyed having you, and your books sound marvelous. And best of luck, and we're certainly going to be reading them.
I concur.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, folks. Ben and I had, that was Jeremy Robinson, and you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on Achieve Radio, and we were talking with Jeremy Robinson, novelist and expert on the great New England sea serpent of, he said 1838 to 1997, and maybe beyond. We don't know. Now, Ben and I, in a funny way, aside from Lake Champlain, have our own kind of monster story in a way, and that has to do with Alexander Lake in Connecticut. Now, we've never seen it, but I can tell you some background. If you look at most of the literature about American lake monsters or water creatures or anything odd, the name of Alexander Lake in Dayville, Connecticut might crop up. It has worked its way into the literature. Now, as luck would have it, our cousin, with whom we are very close, owns a very nice little summer home on that lake. And we have spent many pleasant summer day there. And you used to go out kayaking and swimming in this lake and everything else. Ooh, and it's kind of a now you tell me kind of thing when we heard about the Lake Alexander monster. Now, it has not been seen in some years, but supposedly it manifests itself very much like this New England sea serpent does, only with rolling in the water and bubbles and the long kind of a tail and this sort of thing. And my cousin's husband, who is an avid fisherman, said he's seen a few odd things, but he said the story of this monster, quote unquote, started some years ago when a fellow was fishing on the other side of the lake from their cottage, and something grabbed his hook and really, really almost pulled him into pulled the rod into the water, and he never got the rod back. And of course, as with many things in the paranormal, many paranormal stories, the story grew and got embellished, and here you have it. It's joined the literature, and there we are. So people will talk about the Lake Alexander monster. Frankly, I doubt if there is one. This is one of those lakes that was glacial, right? Am I right about that, or wasn't man-made?
No, it was glacial.
Yeah, glacial lake. And for those of you who are not into the last ice age, these glaciers descended over northern parts of the world, including New England here, and scooped out these huge basins. And when the glaciers retreated, they filled with water and became lakes. So one wonders how any sort of a monster would get in there, unless from the ocean.
It walked.
Well, we laugh, but we have a distant cousin, Frank Courtenay, who is an expert on the snakehead fish, the Chinese snakehead fish, which literally walks from pond to pond and eats everything in these lakes and creates environmental chaos. One wonder, well, how did the fish get into the lake? These are all questions that are good. So who knows? There could be things, but frankly, I kind of have my doubts about the Lake Alexander monster. Anyway, I have a couple of other stories to share with you about our lake monsters here, or sea monsters. And there are many, many stories from all over the place. There was a story, and I wish I do not. I'm only going to recite it from memory because I don't have it actually written down. But it was reported in a newspaper. I believe it was one of the Chicago newspapers of the 1880s, I should say. And they even had an illustration of the U.S. Army coming up against a monster, supposedly, which came out of a lake in, I believe it was the Black Hills of, one of the areas in the Middle West. I should have been better prepared for this, but there's a story of it coming up out of the water and literally attacking a troop of U.S. soldiers who, fortunately for them, happened to have artillery with them. And apparently they blasted the heck out of this thing, and it wasn't killed, but it went back into the water. And then I may be wrong about that, but the commander of the unit, who was a captain, reported in his official report that he had successfully fought off a monster of some sort or something like that. So there's just really quite a few very interesting things.
Wait, what was that? There was like a monster. These like I forgot where it was. It was like somewhere in New England. They were like some dock workers. They found like a monster or something. It was like dead, and they took it out of the water. They put it like on like the deck. They took a picture with it. Like everyone from the dock like took a picture with it. They all went to have lunch, and they came back, and it was gone.
That's interesting. Oh, that was in Gloucester, wasn't it?
I think it was.
Everything happens in Gloucester.
Must be the name.
Yeah, I don't have any report on that either. That's worth looking up, though. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, you don't remember that?
No. Well, I'm 55 years old. Give me a break.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, we were talking about Champ, Lake Champlain monster, and I spent a lot of time up there. We have a family up there in Vermont. We're not that far from it. But I've never seen any evidence myself. Now, just to give you a little bit of background on that particular creature, I guess you might call it an inland water monster, something that there's no immediate connection with the sea, although in times past there apparently was with Lake Champlain, so it is feasible that something really bizarre from the ocean could have gotten in there. It's an elusive creature, and Lake Champlain is about 100 miles long. It's between Vermont and New York State. And it also ends up just north of the Canadian border in the province of Quebec. One of the first descriptions of this creature, was made on August 30th, 1878 by 6 people on a small yacht. And what they say they saw was an extraordinarily odd living thing with, as one observer said, quote, 2 large folds just back of the head projecting above the water. And at some distance, say 50 feet or more behind, 2 or more folds at what was apparently the tail, unquote. Later, this monster, or perhaps a descendant, would be known as Champ. It's consistently been reported over the years, as recently as 1981. That's this source, but it's been reported many times since then. There are people who spend pretty much most of their lives, just as they do at Loch Ness, researching this monster of Lake Champlain, and they're camped out on the shore, which is still much of it pretty rural, on both the New York and Vermont sides. And there you have that. That's something, as I say, we find very fascinating. The city of Burlington has turned it, which is the largest city in Vermont, has turned it into pretty much of a tourist thing. Remember last time we were there, they had, the pictures of it and all sorts of things named after it and that sort of thing. So
remember that video that was on, like, it was, like, on the news, like, this woman took with, like, her phone or something, and it was, like, something swimming under her boat?
Yes, that was quite remarkable. There was a videotape. Is it on YouTube?
I think it is.
I think it's on YouTube. Of some people were out actually looking for. They were fishing and I think looking for Champ, and they had video of some kind. Whether it was over the phone, I don't know. And you could see a large, long creature kind of swimming under their boat. Excuse me. And they were able to get that on some sort of digital medium, and I think you can see it on YouTube. But so there is some evidence for Champ and for some of these other creatures. Now there is another story here that I've kind of always enjoyed. Kind of goes back a ways, but it's 1734. A Norwegian missionary named Hans Egede, I believe that's how it's pronounced, was on his way to Greenland, and he spotted something incredible as his vessel neared the Danish colony of Good Hope on the Davis Strait in Greenland. And he says, quote, on the 6th appeared a very terrible sea animal, which raised itself so high above the water that its head reached above our main top. It's the mast. And it had a long, sharp snout and blew like a whale, had broad, large flippers, and the body was, as it were, covered with hard skin, was very wrinkled and uneven on its skin. Excuse me. Moreover, on the lower part, it was formed like a snake, and when it went under the water again, it cast itself backwards, and in doing so, it raised its tail above the water. And in so doing, above the water and the whole ship length of its body. That evening, we had a very bad weather. Okay. Now, there is an interesting connection, seemingly, between these sea monsters and bad weather. Hear these stories. And one of the things I wanted to ask Jeremy, but forgot, was what sort of weather these people were seeing this creature in. And, of course, the weather will also have an effect on what you're seeing and how clearly you're seeing it.
And what sea monster you see.
That's true. So whatever people are seeing, they're seeing something, as with UFOs and wherever else. And we did ask the question, too, about whether there was a flap that Jeremy was aware of and he wasn't. And most people don't look at it that way. What I mean by a flap is an outbreak of paranormal phenomena that accompany sometimes these sightings of other things. We saw that very frequently in the Mothman cases in the Ohio Valley of the 1960s in the USA, where Mothman, the main thing as it was called, would manifest itself and scare drivers at night and be seen flying through the air and this sort of thing. But also at the same time, there were outbreaks of ghosts and UFOs, poltergeist activity, and this sort of thing. And we've actually talked to some witnesses who had seen that and had experienced it. But in any case, the mystery continues. And at any time, please let us know your stories if you have any experiences of any of these sea creatures or anything else. We always love to hear them. Drop us an email, Paul or Ben at behindtheparanormal.com. And at any time, check out our website, behindtheparanormal.com, for upcoming shows, past shows, archives, talking points, different things that you might find interesting, and connections with our many other websites.
All that good stuff.
Absolutely. And I wanted to get into some emails here, and I read Ben this, and he thought it was hilarious, but I wanted to just sort of share this one with you. And it's really not about anything serious, but it's from a loyal listener whom we like very much, but I just love the way this was worded. It says, I tell you, Paul, I usually listen to your show late at night when I wake up and can't get back to sleep. I listen and then get back to sleep easily. Now, if that's a backhanded compliment, I guess it is. But I hate to think of myself as a talking Sominex pill. I don't know. Anyway, but after listening to last night's show, this is last week, the show we did about the paranormal fringe and all the ultra weird stuff that we've run into.
Crazy.
I feared I'd slip somehow into another universe, or at the least have nightmares of little men flying around in the sky. An image of those flying monkeys in The Wizard of Oz came to mind, and sleep was slow to come. Well, we're glad to be of service when we can help you sleep, and we're also glad to be of service when we prevent sleep. I suppose that's one of the things we do on the show here.
That's what we do.
We have, let's see, an email here that has been around for a while, and we have not had a chance to get to it, and it's kind of long, and I think we have a few minutes to do that tonight. This is from Zach, okay, and I am not sure where Zach is, but he writes, Mr. Eno, I recently read an article of yours online called The Real Nature of Reincarnation. If you look at either of the main sites, newenglandghosts.com or footstepsintheattic.com, it has connections with a number of articles that I've written about not just ghost experiences, but various things having to do with the multiverse and its meaning for us and its implications for our understanding of everything. And one of these is the real nature of reincarnation. And Zach continues, I am a big believer in NDEs. NDE stands for near-death experience, something that anybody in the paranormal is probably familiar with as something that happens when you are about to die and you have various experiences that supposedly are connected with that. Very interested in NDEs, life after death, etc. And I have a real difficult time believing in reincarnation, which is often closely tied in with NDEs and such. I thought that my immortal spirit is going to be recycled turns me off completely. Okay, now there are a couple of terms in here, Zach, that I would like to address. There are a number of assumptions that we make about the world, the quote-unquote afterlife and things of this kind that may or may not be accurate. And I always say, if you don't ask the right question, you cannot get the right answer. Immortal spirit, okay, that term. The multiverse, as I have come to understand it, seems to imply the immortality of the whole human being, body and all, simply because if we exist in all these parallel worlds, we can't really die because our body exists there too. Our whole notion of afterlife and survival, especially in a religious sense, is kind of unique among those of among human cultures. Zach is Zach, okay, in this world, in this life, in this time stream, in this part of the multiverse where our consciousness exists. But in our common belief system, including reincarnation or Christianity or whatever kind of belief takes us into the next life, we have a belief that Zach wants to remain Zach, not only after he dies, but forever. Now think about that. That's an unusual concept in human spirituality. The idea that we want to be, it's the ultimate in individualism, which is something that the multiverse kind of disagrees with. The multiverse finds the glory of the individual in actually being part of others. And there are many NDEs in which people, and even death memories that have been brought up by hypnotism, if that's legitimate, which say that the greatest experience of dying, quote unquote, was to realize that you weren't dying and were becoming part of everything else around you while still having your own consciousness. And this is kind of what I'm talking about with what happens in the multiverse. So the whole notion of immortal spirit is kind of slippery, in my opinion. It's interesting when I talk with, and I'm often, when people find out I was in the seminary for so long, Christians will come after me if there's something they don't like or compliment me on something I say that they might like. And I should point out that the whole idea of the immortality of the soul and of the immortality of the spirit, if you consider that the same thing, is not a Christian concept. It's a concept that popular Christianity picked up from the religion of Zoroastrianism, from the Middle East. The Christian idea, if you look back at the original theology of it, and even in the Bible, is that the whole, just as I just said when it comes to the multiverse, the whole human being survives, body and soul or spirit. Okay? It's not just one or the other. One of the great theologians whom I happen to have been a student of, Father Alexander Schmemann, had said that the body without the soul is a corpse, and the soul without the body is a ghost. Neither is a human being. And that in the original Christian understanding, the whole human being survives. Okay, but I have to agree with you here, Zach, that to be recycled kind of turns me off too. I find it very interesting that in Western culture, where we are so morbidly attached to the self, which I don't even believe exists, the whole idea that we don't necessarily go poof at the end of our lives, or don't have to face some terrible judgment in the sky with no appeal, is very appealing. And the whole idea of reincarnation has been embraced popularly by the New Age groups and many people who belong to religions that don't accept it. I know a lot of Catholics, for example, who agree with reincarnation. It is a doctrine definitely rejected by the Catholic Church. Many Jews actually had believe in it, and whereas Judaism used to, I think, accept it, or parts of Judaism accept it, but not really officially, as far as I can see. But in any case, reincarnation is not possible from the viewpoint of the multiverse, because you have, as Einstein said, really, time is a function of our consciousness. It really doesn't exist. There is no past. There is no future. So if you have no past and no future as objective realities, how can you have rebirth after rebirth after rebirth? What you apparently have is not reincarnation. You have parallel lives, which I suppose you consider the same thing as we experience it, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But even that is kind of understood by some of the Eastern religions, which reject it as being desirable. In other words, while we in the West may embrace reincarnation or our understandings of parallel lives as being something that will be good because it preserves ourselves, those in Buddhism, say, seek to overcome that and to reach a state of nirvana or fulfillment in which this no longer occurs. To me, I understand that as being able to get in touch with and unite with where you already are in all these other lives. That creates spiritual giants, in my opinion.
Wasn't that Buddha's mission? like his task or
that's it. Lately, Ben and I have been making a study of Buddhism, especially Zen, and we have been talking about it and understanding that Prince Siddhartha, that was his whole thing was to overcome all this and to overcome the notion of rebirth after rebirth after rebirth and to find himself. You know this too, exactly. Okay, I guess we're coming out of time here. We can continue this at some other point, and wanted to just tell you next week, don't miss our show. Who's our guest next week? We've got a pretty good show there lined up for you, and where are we here? Okay. Oh, of course, we have the great Jeff Belanger who'll be with us next week, author of many books and owner of the largest ghost fan site on the web, ghostvillage.com. Jeff will give us the latest updates from the world of pop ghost hunting, and some of our questions ought to stir up some discussion you won't want to miss. Next week here on Achieve Radio, 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific.
AchieveRadio.com, the positive side of broadcasting.